Welcome to Positive Philter with your host, Philip Wilkerson, a podcast that focuses on friends, family, health, and career, with a little self-help along the way. Please join me in this journey for self-improvement, and I hope what I have to share will make you a better person, thus making the world a better place. I hope you enjoy the show. I hope you enjoy the show. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. It's Philip Wilkerson back with another episode of Positive Philter. I'm joined by a special guest. Well, everyone's a special guest because they take their time to join me on the show. Now, you know the world of Alpha is so small, but I did not meet this brother through the world of Alpha. I actually met him through my cousin or cousin-in-law. I don't know how you cousin in love. I don't know what the relationship. I don't know how you define it, but I met him through my cousin Marcy. And she's married to one of my other cousins. They're not cousins. That sounded really weird. But unbeknownst, she's in I think the National Symphony Orchestra. And she said, you have to have this gentleman on your show in regards to his journey in music. And I said, say less. One, he's Fred. It's done. So before we get into this episode, Brother Mayfield, can you introduce yourself to the listeners?
Absolutely. Hi, my name is Cedric Mayfield, originally from Houston, Texas. As you can see, I am in my uniform, so AKA known as Chief Musician or MUC Cedric Mayfield of the United States Coast Guard Band, located in New London, Connecticut at the Coast Guard Academy.
Awesome. So, just getting into it, you love music. When did this love of music start? When did you realize, were you a child prodigy that you were just picking up things and being musical since you came out the womb?
So, my earliest introductions to music were piano lessons at around the age of 4. And the deal with that was that my mother put me in piano lessons. And before too long, she could not afford to continue those lessons. So I had to stop formal piano training. But fortunately, there was a piano in my grandmother's house that I got to toy and tinker with. Many people can relate to that. And then before long, she enrolled me in an arts magnet school in Houston, Texas, where I was introduced to the world of band. And where I first started playing the clarinet, actually, I was 8 years old. In second grade when I got into that ensemble in that elementary school. For those who might not know what an arts magnet is, it's basically like if you've ever seen the TV show Fame from back in the day, where there was just a school where people who did music and dance and arts and all the stuff. So this is an elementary school like that in Houston. And so that's where I was introduced to music from an ensemble level. And again, I was 8 years old and I was just learning the instrument at the time, but it was a great success. It left an indelible mark on my life and my journey in music. And that's kind of where it all began. And of course, again, like many musicians, especially those of African-American descent, I also was playing in church not too long after that, because that's just kind of where a lot of us gain a lot of training outside of formal training, as we learn music in church from the musicians that are there. We learn the repertoire, we learn the hymns, we learn the gospel songs. And so I learned a lot there as well from a young age.
I love it. And so obviously that literally was about to be my next question. It was like, I knew church was in there somewhere. You playing the piano, they gonna get you to, contribute your gifts to the Lord, as they say, through the church. But let's go back to that magnet school. I'm very curious, particularly because I know magnet schools, certain times when they reach, pull out talent and send people to these magnet schools, there's not a lot of, I'm making the assumption there's not a lot of representation, right? So were you like the few Black kids at this magnet school, or like certain magnet schools do, like the art schools, like Duke Ellington is predominantly Black in DC. So
right.
What was your school like in Houston?
At least that I have been able to recognize, many magnet schools usually are set up in what we could call inner city locations or school districts. And so for the most part, like the magnet school I went to was predominantly Black. Mm-hmm. It was in HISD, in a black neighborhood, in a black school district. There were, I could probably count on one hand the number of white students that were at the school while I was there. So it was a black school. The gentleman that ran the band program was Mr. Sammy Harris. And it was interesting because at the time, I was an elementary age student, and he at that time was probably in his 60s or 70s. So he was an older gentleman. It wasn't until way after I was far beyond elementary school that I found out that he was a saxophone player that had played with the Count Basie band in his earlier years. I had no idea when I was in elementary school, and even if I knew then, I wouldn't have known the prowess of what that meant. And so it just turned out that even at that young age, we were working with somebody that was a part of living music history.
I love it. And so, I think a lot, I'm thinking about the movie, Drumline, where, Nick Cannon's character had a lot of talent, but he couldn't read music.
Right.
So talk about that, in your earlier magnet schools, were you learning how to read language and read notes, and they're really training you in that during this early age when you were a kid?
Well, that's just it. Part of that program was the training of how to properly read music. And there were a lot of young people who could play stuff by rote because of church, or who could play stuff by ear. But the reading of music was a development that he ingrained in us as part of the development for what we were doing, as we're all learning essentially classical instruments. I mean, in this ensemble, there were flutes and clarinets and trumpets, a variety of winds and percussion. So the learning of the reading of music was essential because he would program repertoire that we had to learn to read. And so he made sure that as part of our development, we're learning to read the music. Um, in very few instances were we being introduced to improvisation, which oddly enough, more black students were more comfortable with just by virtue of the nature of how many of us learn music. So that kind of was the easy part. It was the learning to read. The discipline of that was more rigorous.
Yeah, see, definitely. And so, I love this. There's like the early, like the upbringing through music. Um, do you believe when you were a child that was learning music that it helped you in other subjects or kept you interested in school, or like obviously you pursued a music career, but like still like learning history, did you gravitate to other subjects while you were a child, or being invested in music help you as a child?
Looking back, I would say that music, I think, inadvertently assisted me in my academic studies. I didn't know that that was happening, but in learning to read music and adapting to being a musician, I think definitely helps me focus in on my studies, or definitely helps certain aspects. It helps me in math, as I was able to progress in math quickly than some of my counterparts in school. It helped me with my reading and just cognitive awareness and things of that nature. So I definitely would attribute music to my growth in academia simultaneously. As I got better at one, uh, I improved in the other.
Yeah, and the reason why I say that, because one of our good brothers, president of VCU, brother Abdullah, he's an engineer, straight up engineer, but he talked about like how activating music has really helped him with his STEM career. Being able to
Nice.
be creative and activate both parts of the brain. So, me being an academic, it's like definitely like expressing creativity needs to go along with that to help. And I think they work together, right? A lot of great scientists love or appreciated music, right? And I don't
Absolutely.
know, just vice versa. So
Yeah,
let's
it's
fast
funny.
forward.
I was
Yeah.
teaching a course at University of Rhode Island, and I teach a music appreciation course for non-majors. And so one of the parallels that I was teaching in a previous semester was that, if you ever watch a good, one of the Marvel movies or some movie where there's an evil villain, there was always this stigma that evil villains love classical music for whatever reason. We can think of a number of movies where that's the
Mm.
case. And so I made the parallel that, that many of these evil villains are also great scientific minds. And so it's no surprise that they also tie those minds with their love of classical music as they develop these, diabolical evil plans. It just kind of goes hand in hand, and that's not by accident. So, like you were just saying, that music and those thought processes do kind of go hand in hand.
Yeah, I love it. That's what I was about to say. Yeah, when I take over the world too, I listen to classical music,
Right.
and then I turn up and listen to trap music, either
There we
or.
go.
Yeah. So let's fast forward. And you're going through high school, whatever. Uh, Take us through, like, did you study music? Obviously, you studied music in college. How did that, tail into your college days swiftly pass?
So oddly enough, I had gone through the training I had in elementary school. And then after elementary school, my mother and I moved to another side of town that was predominantly white.
Mm-hmm.
So that then dropped me into a middle school system that was predominantly white. Um, One of the few things I knew was that I wanted to be in band again, but that was about all I knew because I was in sixth grade in a new area. I didn't know anybody. The only thing I knew is that I wanted to be in band. And so I show up to this band program. There are all these white kids in there, and um, I looking back on it now, I felt weird but didn't know why, and now I know why. Then I didn't know. But an interesting thing was that the band director there, Miss Karen Parmley, was very warm to me and very receptive. But she also picked up right away on my ability to play the clarinet. And it turned out that I could play better than everyone else. I just didn't realize it. I thought that we were all on equal footing. And so she actually kind of grabbed me and was like, "You have a gift, and I'm going to help nurture this." So she put me in position to do more with it than I would have known how to do myself, which helped me to grow leaps and bounds. Because without her tutelage and guidance, I wouldn't have done certain contests. I wouldn't have auditioned for certain things. It was through her pressing me forward and accepting that you do this better than most people and that we should nurture it. And so that was really helpful because I could easily have gone into a situation where they would wanted to have downplayed my abilities and talents because of who I was. And I know that that's happened to a number of people, a number of professional musicians who had to overcome that. I was fortunate enough to be in a position where it was nurtured rather than downplayed. And then that carried on through high school. And there were a number of people who, helped further nurture and guide my musical growth, which led me to getting into college as a music major, which I never in a million years thought that I would do. But once I decided that that was the path for me, I jumped on and didn't look back.
Excellent. So take us through the musical experience. I mean, where'd you go to college and what band,
So
uh,
I did my undergrad studies at Southern Methodist University in Dallas, Texas, which was a primarily classical music program. They did begin the inception of some jazz while I was there, but it was really not of any great magnitude at the time. It was mainly a classical school. And for those who might not know, to kind of get in the musical world, how music schools are. So there's SMU right in the heart of Dallas. About
mhm.
35 minutes north is this place called the University of North Texas that is a juggernaut in the world of schools of music. They are one of the top, if not the best, schools of music for jazz. Not to mention their classical music department is top notch as well. So these two schools are right in the same metroplex. And later in my undergrad development, I started spending a lot of time at North Texas as I got more into jazz because SMU only offered it by so much.
Mhm.
And so while at SMU studying classical, that's also where I met Marcy. We're doing our undergrad at the same place at the same time. And I really learned a lot. It was one of those situations where, I had done a lot of playing in my junior high and high school development. But when I got to SMU, I quickly realized I was not on the same level or playing field as the Marcys of the world because they had done so much more stuff prior to college than I ever did. So I was immediately playing catch up in terms of my development and exposure to repertoire and composers and understanding of theory and history. I was way behind the curve on that stuff because it's just not what I was exposed to. coming up, but many of those students, they were already leaps and bounds ahead in those capacities. So like in many other cases for many other folks in different fields, I had to work twice as hard as the other people. It was just the nature of the beast. And you ask probably many other people in many fields, probably you recognize this yourself in your field, having to work twice as hard as your white counterparts. It's kind of what it boiled down to. And that's what I had to do. I had to buckle down a lot. It was worth it. I'm glad I did it. And I'm glad I met people like Marcy along the way who helped inspire me and helped encourage me and showed me lots of different things. You know, I got to learn from them as well as from my professors. And all the while doing this is where I pledged the Iota Omicron chapter of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, Fall 9/7. So that was also in the mix.
I love it. I love it. I mean, one, I think you spoke to it, and we probably could do a whole another segment on how early exposure to certain things are systemically related to race, meaning like, access to a pool, then you could be swimming, access to classical music. We think a lot, and I'm not going to lie, like when you think of classical music, you think of the direct correlation of wealth, right? Like wealthy people listen to that kind of music,
Absolutely.
right? And then you're dealing with, like those that are exposed through that world of wealth and exposure to classical music and concerts and things like that. It's very systemic, right? And I think that there is now definitely, I've seen, nonprofits, I can't think of the one off the top of my head, where they're like trying to reverse that and do earlier exposure to classical music to Black and brown children, to expose them, for college.
One of the things that I'm experiencing and dealing with now that I'm on this side of the table in a professional capacity, is that we are trying to create a scenario, an environment where I'll just use my own ensemble as an example. In the Coast Guard Band, we are on a big push and initiative to diversify the pool of candidates that audition for this job. And historically, like you just pointed out, most of the people that show up for these auditions are white, classically trained musicians. And so it has become a thing in the classical music world in particular that many organizations and ensembles are trying to figure something out to diversify their ensembles, basically to more accurately reflect the American diaspora, to include more people of color, Black, brown, Asian, you name it. But so in digging into this, one of the key aspects is, if we hold an audition, we will promote the audition historically the same way we always do, reaching out to trade magazines and schools of music and things of that nature. And people will see this info in, enough time to come out to the audition. Well, then we get to the question, why are not more Black musicians showing up to these auditions? There's a couple answers to that. One, we're not making a push to go out to HBCUs where a lot of Black musicians are being trained so that they know about these auditions. And two, many HBCUs or many colleges, universities where Black musicians are being trained, they don't have the faculty and or the backing that trains those musicians well enough to compete for these kinds of jobs. So what a lot of people are trying to do is, one, make ourselves available to HBCUs so that we can get them the info, and two, get in with these musicians to help train them on the repertoire that's necessary, on the performance practices, on the etiquette that's necessary, how to go about finding out about these auditions, how to fund your own travel to get to these auditions, how to do an interview and conduct yourself in these auditions. All this stuff is off the table for a lot of those musicians, because many of them go to, Florida A&MU and they do the marching band because that's the thing. And in the off season, they play in some ensembles and they train to do more marching band, and then that's it. They have no idea about professional orchestras or professional wind ensembles, or they lack the training to prepare to audition for those things. And so we're trying to make a push to create the scenario where they're trained to do it, they know about it, and they can start to come out. Because there's no easy way to fix it other than to infuse those locations with that information.
Yeah, I mean, it's like I said, you could think of all these different like I'm having in my conversations, I'm having this conversation across industries, creative, STEM, like it's all about this getting to it's systemic, getting the exposure to certain groups that have been marginalized, that have not given this exposure before, and then these old methods where we said, like you said, we've been putting it and promoting it this way, they're not coming. Well, if they historically have not looked at these avenues, then why doing the same things? You think they're going to get a certain pool? It's like, was it Insanity's doing the same thing and thinking of a different result? Like you got to, as you said, have different, go to different pools for talent, go to different places for talent, do different ways of outreach, because it's a cyclical thing, and if you don't break that cycle, you're going to get the same results. Post this in a magazine, you're going to get the same people coming to the auditions. So
absolutely,
things got to change. Well, I was jumping around, but I love that sidebar. Yeah, how did being a musician help you in Alpha? Were you the one that always had the same? I don't know. I'm just curious. Like, how did that? Because of your musical talent, how did that show up in your college days in Alpha?
So it's funny you bring that up, because I distinctly remember during my intake process, I was the ace, and on more than one occasion, I that's when I realized my capacity to memorize a lot of information, much more so than my LBs. And so the other brothers were like, "How do you always remember all this stuff? Your LBs don't remember anything." And I was just like, "Well, I memorize music. Like I memorize stuff, and I just like it's there." And that's when I came to realize, okay, so I can see the correlation now, and how that this in music can help me in other avenues, particularly as it showed up as becoming an alpha. And so then after that process, down the line, as we would engage in activities, I was the secretary for a while, so keeping track of information and doing other offices within the chapter. Just recalling information was one of the big things that I could tell transferred over from music to other aspects, in Alpha in particular. And then, of course, preparing for step shows, having an ear for kind of laying out the soundtracks that we used to use, or just being able to pick up on rhythm in a different way than how everybody else was doing it. Ultimately, we would all come together, but I noticed quickly that my way of picking up the steps and the transitions was different from some of the other brothers, and it helps me to translate that information to some of them, because it gave them a different way to look at it, and so to speak.
I love it. So when in your point, obviously you study music with the idea that this was a career. You go to college to study, ideally prepare yourself for the working world. So what was your thoughts on, like, okay, this is the career aspect, this is what I want to do with this major, career part in regards to your music studies?
So growing up in Texas, there are two absolutes: it's hot and football is life.
Yes.
So I, in addition to being a musician, was also an athlete. And so early on, I just knew that I loved music, and it was always there, elementary, junior high, high school. But I was really into sports. I trained hard. I played football. That was my main sport. And I really had those grandiose thoughts, like everyone else, of, getting a scholarship, going D1 and playing ball. But I also did music, and I loved it, and I practiced a lot. And I was kind of an oddball in high school, because the schedule that I maintained, I look back now, and it was just ludicrous. I would show up before school an hour early and practice, and then I would do school, and then I would practice clarinet at lunch, and then I would have football practice after school, and then I would hit the weight room, and then I would practice again after, and then I would go home and do homework and all stuff. But I would still kick it and hang out with the fellas, and I would still do all the high school stuff. I barely ever slipped. I don't know how I did it all. It was crazy. And so as I was getting ready to go into college, I really didn't know that I wanted to major in music. But when I was a senior in high school, I played with the Houston Youth Symphony. I had auditioned to and got into that ensemble. And the level of musicianship in that ensemble was up 3 or 4 notches from my high school ensemble. Although the high school ensemble was very good, but this was the best high school musicians in the Houston area playing in this classical ensemble, and I just fell in love. It was bigger and better than anything I had experienced, and so it really made me get substantially more serious about music. And the real turning point was our finale concert that year. We played a concert at Rice University, and we had a featured guest artist, Chick Corea. And at the time, I didn't know who Chick Corea was. I just thought he was a piano player. So we played a Mozart piano concerto with him, I think the first movement. And it was fantastic just watching him work and watching him do what he did. And so at the end of that concert, he did like a couple of jazz features, and it blew my mind because I had never seen up close anything like this. And then at the end of that, he asked for some musicians to come up on stage with him at the piano and do some improv. And like my colleagues like pushed me out on the stage, like go play. And I was like, I have no idea what's going on here. I've never played jazz. But Chick Corea was very gracious and very inspirational and supportive, even right then on stage. So he was just like telling me what to do. He would play something and go, okay, now do this. And so I did it. And then he would play something and say, now do this. And I did it. And so all the while we're doing this, the crowd's going wild. They're like losing their minds. And right at that moment, that's when I was like, this is the coolest thing I've ever done. I want to do this for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
At that moment, that's when I knew. And
that was
so
your big
after
stage.
that was it. So that's when I started finding out, like, okay, what does it take to do this? And then that's when I learned about, going to college and majoring in music. And so I was like, okay, cool. That's it. That's what I want to do. And so it went from there.
That's cool. I mean, I'm thinking of like that's your big stage. That's your Friday Night Lights. That's the
Yeah,
moment's
right, exactly.
on. The moment was on you. So I see that you're in the military. How did you pursue and had the military career with your music? How did that happen?
So it really came about in an odd way. I had done SMU, my undergrad, and I had graduated. And then upon graduating, I think it was the summer before my senior year at SMU, I had started working with a Broadway musical program in Galveston, Texas, where they pretty much went around the country and auditioned all of these theater majors, musical theater people, and brought them down for basically a summer stock of musicals. So they brought all these collegiate singers and dancers down, and for a whole summer they put on, like 8, 9 musicals, like back to back to back. And they needed musicians for this, so I ended up getting into that through a friend of mine. And so I had done, this whole slew of musicals. And so the following summer, when I was getting ready to graduate, I was doing those musicals, and the guy that I had worked with, the musical director, the previous summer, called me and said, "Hey, listen, I'm in New York. I'm hiring my musicians for this national tour. Do you want in?" And I was just graduating, so I was like, "Bet, a job? Yeah, let's go." So he hired me out, and that summer, after I did the summer stint with that program, I was heading to New York to start preparing for the tour to go out. But the caveat to that is, this is my first gig, fresh out of undergrad. I was very excited, and it was going to start. I think it was, we're supposed to start late August, or no, late September. But they called me, or like the first few days of September, was like, "Hey, listen, we're going to actually do some pre-recording, some tracks, so because we're going to do promotional stuff for the musical. Can you come to New York early and do the recording?" And I told him no, I couldn't because, I was spending time with my family before I go on the road. And, I'm a mama's boy. So I was like, I'm doing some stuff with my mom before I hit. I can't really make it. So I'll catch you guys when we meet to start rehearsals. And the point to that story is that was the weekend of 9/11. So I was in Houston, and like just a couple days before that with the phone call. So I got up that morning of 9/11, turned on the TV. I didn't know what was going on. And then when I realized that's when I knew that, had I told them, yeah, I would have been in Manhattan at that time where they were. And so luckily they were all okay. But yeah, that was 9/11 when that happened. And so, I always think back to that and think, God, you put that on my heart to stay home with my family. I could have been there. And who knows what would happen. So all that passed, the musical still went out. And so I did my contract with them. And then during that contract, I was, while we were out in various cities, I would go out and do stuff like master classes at colleges, universities, and stuff like that, meet professors. And in addition, while I was doing that, I was also checking out grad school. So I ended up taking an audition at some places for potential grad school, and then I ended up at University of Memphis, where I did my master's degree. And so while I was doing my master's degree, I had a car accident, a very bad car accident, and it forced me to take a semester off. So I went back to Dallas and was studying with my previous clarinet teacher so that I could get back in shape to play. And while I was doing that, an Air Force woodwind quintet came to the concert. And afterwards, we were talking to them. And the guy in charge of the group was telling me that, hey, we're having a clarinet audition at the end of this year. You should come out. And I told him, I'm not really prepared to come out and do this audition because of what had happened, but, I'll keep you guys in mind. My teacher says to the guy, give me the info, he'll be there.
Yes.
So they leave, and I tell my teacher, what are you doing? I'm not prepared for this. Like, I'm still getting recovered from this accident. And he says, you and I are going to train, and then you're going to go win that job. And that's exactly what happened. So, but prior to that, I mean, if you had asked me would I go into the military, I would have told you definitely not, and here's the reasons why. But I ended up taking that audition and winning that job, and now next thing I know, I'm off to join the Air Force. So I finished my master's degree, lickety split, and then like a few days after that, I was in basic training for the Air Force. So I spent my initial 5 years in the Air Force bands, and that's kind of how it all jumped off, which was a fantastic career. I did a lot of traveling, a lot of playing with them. But actually, the last group that I was with was in Germany. I was in Europe the year prior to joining the Coast Guard. So I spent a year traveling around Europe playing with the Air Force bands, which was phenomenal. My family got to experience Europe. I got to experience Europe and some things that most people from my position, this kid from inner city Houston is now traveling around Europe making music. I would never ever have thought that possible for myself. I even played in the Middle East for 3 months, which was that's a whole nother story. That was great. And so even from within that story, um, my first commanding officer in the Air Force reached out to me and said, hey, I talked to a friend at the Coast Guard band. They're having a clarinet audition. I think you should take the audition because I think you're well suited for what they're looking for. And of course, I told them, no, it's not possible. Like, first off, I didn't even know the Coast Guard had a band. Secondly, I just re-enlisted and I'm here in Europe and this is going great and I don't want to mess with that. And my wife told me, well, I just want you to know that the Lord put on my heart that you're going to take that audition and you're going to win that job. So I said, okay, well, I guess I should look further into this. And so, long story short, I'll spare you the details for time's sake. All the doors that I thought were closed opened, and I ended up coming out here and winning this job for the Coast Guard band, which is a premier band. And so, for those who don't know what that means, of all all the military services have music ensembles, and of all those music ensembles, each branch of the military has a premier music organization that represents them. And most of them are in DC. The Coast Guard is the only one that their premier band is not in DC, which is why I'm in Connecticut. And so being able to get into a premier band was again another huge milestone that I never thought possible for myself. But the Lord has opened all these doors through all these people that made these opportunities possible. Which is why, going back to the beginning of our section here, I feel it necessary for me to pay it forward because there are so many musicians of color who not only don't get these opportunities, but may not even know about these kinds of things that I've experienced in my career. So it's necessary for me to put this stuff out there for them to know about and maybe shoot to achieve for themselves. Because they were just, God's hand for me, just sheer luck. Because otherwise I would never have known about this stuff. But now here I am. I'm obligated to share this info with other people.
I love it. I love it. Well, we definitely could do another part, but we're gonna go to my next segment called Shot for Shot, which is I get to ask you any random question. You can ask me any random question. You want to go first, or I go first?
No, please.
All right. So I love when they do like those like hip hop concerts with classical music, Nas or whatever. So if you could have a dream scenario where you compose and work with any hip hop artist, it gotta be that like any artist, who would it be and why? And then what songs would you love to add a symphony component to?
Oh wow, that's a good one. We talking just hip hop?
All right, now I was gonna be kind of firm, but now you could say, okay, anyone, you could do rock music, whatever. Someone that doesn't do classic, you gotta collab with them.
Sure. Uh, I mean that's a pretty broad range, so I think I'll just narrow it down to the genre of rap and hip hop. I think, um, man, I think it would be really interesting to work with Dr. Dre because of the music that he's laid out over decades and decades. Um, I'm sure it's unfortunate that many people would probably be surprised his depth of knowledge of music. And so he would probably be, in my opinion, the one guy who could make a project like this that you're speaking of not only possible, but way beyond the confines of what one would think it could be, just in terms of what his musical knowledge and what he would bring to the table and what we could compose and arrange together, perhaps. Uh, it would probably end up being something along the lines of, multiple MCs, a full orchestra, vocalists. Just like it would go beyond. It would start reaching out into areas that I would, because he's such a musical, dare I say, a musical genius. His mind expands into so many different ways as he's laying down tracks. You can hear it and just pick a Dr. Dre produced album, and you can hear all the little nuances that he puts in of stuff, along with the classic sound of West Coast rap that he puts in. Man, that would be super fun. I couldn't even imagine. I would be a kid in a candy shop. That would be fantastic.
I'm surprised. I'm surprised you went all the way West Coast and didn't say someone like Bun B or something. You know what I'm saying? Or someone from Texas. But that
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, that would be cool. But if we're going big, like
you
that
going
would be
big,
the way
big.
to go.
Okay. So what's your random question for me?
Oh, geez, I wasn't prepared. I didn't think I would have any. I I try to keep up with you since Marcy introduced us, and see what you have going on. And I appreciate you taking the time out of your clearly very busy schedule to make this podcast happen. But in all that you have going on, what is the ultimate funnel, the ultimate goal with all of the things that you have happening for yourself right now?
I think that's the career coach that I need to career coach. Like I got my hats in different things. I started a doctoral program. I got a family. I got this podcast. I don't know. I think no matter what, I was thinking about it at the root of it was education and teaching, and at the root of it is helping people. So, I think the funnel, as long as I feel like it's of service to others, that kind of gives me drive. Uh, like let's say down the line, I get this doctorate. I want to be an educator of some sort. And I'm doing communication because I like to talk. So somewhere
Nice.
public speaking, podcasting, media, that's always going to be there. And that infusion of education and creativity. Like I like to learn myself, but I like to teach, but I also like to be creative. So if there's any aspect where I could be a creative educator, that's going to be what I want to do. Which I don't know. Maybe that could be like teaching how to do a podcast. I don't know. I don't know where it is yet,
Awesome.
but or a communications class. Like I'm a professor and we study that mode of we study the medium of like I have a class that I teach that every semester and with my professor jacket and looking to shovel like the what's it called, the absent-minded professor, you know what I'm saying? So
Nice.
but I
That's
know I
awesome.
know that my North Star, while it's all funky and I don't know the whole direction of my life and future, I know that like my decision tree, as long as it really normally points to, is this helping someone else? Is this educating someone else? Do I have that identity as an educator still in this space? Am I still teaching people? And Most times the answer is still yes.
That's fantastic.
Quick story. Like the funny thing is, I was in a black male class, all black males in the 10th grade, and I stayed in touch with that teacher, Mark Holbrook. And I say this to say, like, he must have planted the seed of educators, because we were in this all black male class supporting each other. This is where I met my best friends. This is where I met, my best friend who became the father, godfather of my children, all this. And he told us, he was like, it was a class, like, you could be anything you want and chase your dreams, and black men, we stick together. Like, it was very empowering, right? Well, like over 90% of that class became educators.
Wow.
Like, he was like, like all throughout Fairfax County, we got like gym teachers, we got, school counselors, me working in higher ed. And I met him I was with him at this 50th birthday party, but just another time I was having lunch, and he was like, "Hell, man, I thought y'all was gonna be CEOs. I told y'all it could be anything you wanted. How come y'all became drunk educators?" And I was like, "Holbrook, it's your fault, because like you inspired us like to hold on to that identity of, teaching people. Like all of us gravitated to it naturally.
Absolutely.
Like it was just weird how we all just kind of fell in. We didn't grow up like at the 10th grade and say, yo, we're all gonna be teachers, right? Or even go to college and study education. None of us studied different things. None of us really studied education. But somewhere along the lines, half of us kind of fell into being some form of PE teacher, school administrator, school counselor, higher ed professional. We fell into education. And so
nice.
To pull that back to your story, I think that my North Star, because of Holbrook, and because I really ingrained that, I really believe that part of my identity is an educator. Like I am an educator. That's who I believe I am as a person. Like I'm Philip Wilkerson, the educator. I can add that. I even got on my car tags, Alpha Educator.
Yes.
And as
I
I
need to
say,
get one of those mugs.
Educator. A couple of them, teachers. What I'm saying, professors. So it's like I don't know. So check in with me. If I'm doing something completely different in education, you can call me out and say I sold out. So you a sellout. You're just talking about you loving people and helping educate. Now you're making all this money. But
never that, man. Spread it around.
That's it. So this has been a great episode. I'm so happy to have you on here. This is the part of the show where you get to show love, called shout outs and plugs. Shout out anyone you want to show love to, anyone. And then plugs. These are things directly that you're working on, or ways that people can get engaged with you or connect with you, whatever. And I'll put that in the show notes. So this part of the show is yours. Shout outs and plugs.
Fantastic. Thanks for that opportunity. I'll start with shout outs. It sounds very contrived, and we see this all the time, especially award shows. But when given the opportunity, I feel like I'd be remiss if I didn't take the opportunity to just say I thank God for putting me in the position that I'm in. It is through Him and through lots of prayer over my life that I'm sitting right here with you at this moment, recalling my life and journey and all of the things that I've been able to do and see and accomplish. Um, Shout out to my moms, who I will definitely send a link to this podcast. She was the driving force behind all of it, from the time she put me in piano lessons when I was 4, up through all of me trying to be both an athlete and a musician, and do student council, and do all the groups, and do all the stuff, and keeping me in church, and keeping me fed and clothed, and supporting me and encouraging me. She was always there and never failed, and she's still there right now. And so definitely a shout out to her for all the lifelong support. Many people can relate, I'm sure. Shout out to Marcy for putting us in touch. Without her, I don't know that I would have come across you, but thanks to her, here we are. I love her to death. She's a great human being, and a very good friend, and a wonderful musician with the Atlanta Symphony Orchestra. Shout out to them as well. Big shout out to Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, whom we represent. May we continue to hold up the light and represent them fully, and go forward with what the Brotherhood is doing in pockets of society around the country and around the world. Thankful for what they are doing, and thankful for all that I gained through Alpha and can still continue to. Big shout out to the United States Air Force Band family. It really is a tight knit group of people. I just was on some phone calls this weekend from some people that I was in Air Force bands with, which is funny because if you like listen to the story, I haven't been in an Air Force band in 13 years, but I'm still very close with so many of those people. We traveled so much together and worked so hard together. Those bonds are super tight, and I love them, and I love what the Air Force is doing even today with music. Um, Big shout out to SMU and the University of Memphis, where I received my degrees. I learned a lot and met some great people, and it was through those avenues a lot of people encouraged me, my professors and my colleagues, who inspired me and showed me that certain things can be done in spite of myself, which was also very great. Um,
And then plugs. What are you working on, or things you want the listeners to know, or how can they contact you or stay engaged with you?
Got you. Also, a big shout out to the United States Coast Guard, where I currently work and make music. What a phenomenal organization. And if any of you ever see that the Coast Guard is coming to your area, go and check out the ensemble. It's first rate. You will not be disappointed. And you've already paid for the concert with your tax dollars. So we thank you very much. Uh, Plug stuff that we have going on right now. Um, we just finished a very busy summer season with the Coast Guard band. We are just coming off of vacation and now are tooling up for our fall season, where we're going to do a lot of local concerts here in the Northeast United States. We've already done our tours earlier in the summer and in the spring, so we won't be doing too much traveling in the fall. But if you're in the Northeast or local area, keep your eyes open for Coast Guard performances. In addition to that, I play with the New London Big Band, which is a big band that was created here in the New London, Connecticut area by another Coast Guard bandsman, Sean Nelson. We've had a lot of really great projects that he's put together. We've recorded an album that has now been released. We're really hoping that that falls into the hands of the recording arts, aka the Grammys, so that somebody will listen to that and give a nod to the album. We recently played at Birdland in New York City. Have done a lot of great concerts and performances and some videos. So go on to Facebook and look up New London Big Band and check out some stuff we have going on. We have a concert coming up September 10th, where we'll be opening for the great Kitty Garrett, saxophonist, who is a living legend in the jazz world. So it's going to be very exciting to play with him. He was a big influence on me, and I can't wait to meet with him again for that concert on the 10th. My own jazz ensemble called Epitome does some stuff from time to time. For a lot of musicians, the pandemic really hit the world of the arts very hard, and so now coming back out of that, we're starting to perform again. We released an album a couple years back called Appreciation, and so if you go either to the Epitome website or Facebook page, it will send you some information as to how to find that album, which is still available on iTunes and in Amazon, I believe. That was our first album. It was a great project, and we will soon be tooling up for a second project as soon as we get things settled and together.
Excellent, man. I wrote this down. I'm gonna have to actually follow up because, man, you dropped too many things for me to keep. I was writing it all down. I need all these album links. I definitely want to put those album links in the show notes so those can listen. I'm gonna have to listen to that stuff too. So make sure I'm gonna follow up with
Fantastic.
you via email to get some of those references because I definitely want people to check out the music. Well, thank you so
Absolutely.
much, brother Mayfield. Man, it's been great. Definitely supporting you and, as you say, watching you from afar. And if you're ever in the DMV, you had to come by and visit. You got a spot to hang
Absolutely.
out with, my spot, my place. But we also would love, if you're ever performing too, hey, shout out to your boy and hook it up with free tickets. I'll come watch you.
You got it.
But
Absolutely.
but just appreciate it. I think, obviously the brotherhood, I already knew as soon as Marcy introduced and she's introduced us, I said, she know good people. She is good people. And then it was crazy. I were just all the stars were aligned. So I'm really glad that we actually did this. I learned a lot about you. And I feel really appreciative that you took your time out of your busy schedule too, because you're doing all kinds of music stuff to join us. So definitely,
Indeed.
Positive Filter listeners, check this out. Check out his music, support him, download it, share it, whatever. Also share this podcast with your family member and friends. I also want to make a formal announcement that every episode is going to be dedicated to my father-in-law, Jeff Kirsch. And I will also include in the show notes the Jeff Kirsch Anti-Hunger Advocacy Fund that's in his name with FRAC. I can't pronounce the acronym out, but just important. He's a great man. He's done a lot for the world in regards to fighting hunger and support the fund, which will help those going into that career. So I'll put that in the show notes. And I also just wanted to shout out him. And every episode I will do this is dedicated to him. If you want to leave a voicemail for the podcast, it's 571-336-6560. That's 571-336-6560. Share this episode, like it, give it a rating or review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Sharing positivity is a movement, and we're out.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Brother Phil. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to Positive Philter, a podcast that focuses on family, friends, career, with a little self-help along the way. If you enjoyed this podcast, please share it with your family and friends, and like the Facebook page, Spreading Positivity a Movement. Thanks for listening.